Today we're going to be talking about mindfulness. I assume that you're all somewhat, if not very familiar with the concept of mindfulness. Maybe you use it in your personal lives. Maybe you integrate it into your clinical practice. Maybe it's just something that you've heard about, but you don't really necessarily use it in any way. Today we're going to focus on how DBT understands mindfulness and how it integrates it into the work that we do, and how you could use it to enhance your clinical practice. 20 years ago, when I was in graduate school, I was interning at an outpatient child and adolescent psych unit at a hospital in New York, and they had an adolescent DBT program. So all the students were part of the DBT program, and as part of the program, we went to weekly team meetings, and we co-led DBT groups, which essentially meant sitting in the group and learning the skills along with the participants. And if we had something to add, we could add it. And at the end of the year, I remember thinking, I have a pretty good handle of DBT. I understand it, but mindfulness, I just don't get it. Why is it part of DBT? What's the purpose of it? And now, all these years later, now that I've returned to DBT, at this point in my life, and I've been, I realized I didn't understand what mindfulness was at all, because mindfulness is such an integral part of the treatment. Okay, so today we're going to talk about what mindfulness is, briefly define it. We're going to talk a little bit about its origins and integration into psychotherapy. We're going to spend some time talking about how DBT understands mindfulness and uses mindfulness. We're going to discuss mindfulness skills and emotion regulation. We're going to discuss some clinical applications of mindfulness and some potential pitfalls of mindfulness. Okay, so what is mindfulness? Mindfulness, in its simple essence, is the practice of paying attention in the present moment intentionally and without judgment. I use this picture because I think oftentimes when people think of mindfulness, they think about meditation, maybe a prolonged period of meditation. And obviously there's a lot of overlap between mindfulness and meditation, but it doesn't have to be sitting, with our eyes closed, in like a Zen posture. So mindfulness has very early origins. It goes back 25,000 years, originating really from Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism. I don't believe there's any comparable word in Hebrew for mindfulness, and maybe not an exact concept in mindfulness in Torah, but there's certainly many ideas within Torah that overlap with mindfulness. I think the idea of kavanah very much overlaps with mindfulness, and there have been many books written about Torah and mindfulness, such as Benji Epstein's book. So in the 1970s, which kind of makes sense given what was going on in the world, mindfulness started spreading to the West. The first treatment that incorporated mindfulness was created by John Kabat-Zinn in 1982, and he calls it mindfulness-based stress intervention. The first clinical modality created by psychologists was ACT in 1986, and that was acceptance and commitment therapy. And then in the late 1980s, Marshall Linehan developed DBT, which very much incorporates mindfulness, as we'll be discussing. So DBT conceptualizes that people have three different states of mind that we could be in. One state of mind is reasonable mind. Reasonable mind is a very cold state, very task-oriented, logical. It's kind of like when you're in the zone trying to get something done. So when we're in that state of mind, we might not notice if we're hungry, we might not notice if we're tired, we might not notice if we're feeling a certain emotion. We're just in the zone trying to get something accomplished. Another state of mind is emotion mind. This is what people often come to DBT for. It's a dysregulated state. It's when emotions are in the driver's seat. It's a hot state of being, emotionally driven, and we're not really so connected with reason and logic when we're in that state of mind. And wise mind is the integration of the two. So it's a place where we can both access our emotions and we can access our rational thought. And mindfulness helps get us to a place of wise mind, which is why it's so important in DBT. DBT defines mindfulness. It breaks it down into two different categories. They call it the what skills and the how skills. The what skills is kind of like what mindfulness is. What is mindfulness? There's three different ways that DBT says that we can be mindful. The first two, I think, are kind of the same experience, and the third one is very different. So observing is taking in what's going on either within ourselves or outside of ourselves. So within ourselves, we might notice what we're feeling, physical sensation, physiological sensations, thoughts, urges, any internal experience we could observe mindfully. And outside of us, anything we can observe with our five senses. So anything we could see, touch, taste, smell, or hear. Describing is basically the same experience, just putting words to it. So if we're noticing, let's say that we are anxious, if we're describing the experience, we might say, I'm noticing it's hard for me to breathe. Feels like there's pressure on my chest. Or if we're noticing something external to us, I'm noticing all the colors of the rainbow. Look at a rainbow, right? And really like describing everything that you're seeing. Participating is a very different experience because we're not intentionally focusing our attention. We're just kind of in the moment, doing, being, or whatever. So different examples of participating might be singing, dancing, playing a sport, playing an instrument, being immersed in a conversation. We're not self-conscious when we're in this state. We're not thinking, what should I say next? What should I do next? What does the other person think about me? We're in it. We're really present with what we're doing. And I think also driving a car is a participating state to be in because I'm sure you've all, those of you who drive, have had the experience many times of driving somewhere and not remember having driven there, right? So obviously there's some level of awareness. We didn't get into an accident. We got where we needed to go. But oftentimes we're not, so present as we drive. But we can't be observing while we're driving either because then if we're thinking like, hey, how does the wheel feel? And now I'm pressing down on the gas and pressing down the brake. We probably will get into an accident. So we have to be in this participating state where we're present, ideally, and we're just kind of doing what we know how to do. Okay, and then there's the how skills. The how skills are how to be mindful. These are different definitions that DBT gives for being mindful. The first one is non-judgmentally. This one is really important and I think also really challenging because we all judge, right? We judge ourselves, we judge other people, and letting go of judgments is hard. So the first thing that we teach clients is just noticing the judgment, right? We can't stop our thoughts, but we can start to notice them and we can start to also untangle from them so we don't just take the judgments as reality. We're recognizing that we're judging. I think sometimes we get caught up, we talk about in DBT about not judging the judgment. So sometimes when people are trying to stop judging or let go of judgments, they'll notice a judgment come up and then they'll be like, why are you judging again, right? So we don't want to do that. We just want to sort of notice. And also we talk about replacing judgment with curiosity, which I really like. So instead of judging ourselves, let's say for judging, we could be curious. Why am I judging right now? What caused the judgment to come up right now? Or why am I feeling this way right now? Instead of judging it, being curious. One mindfully is the act of doing one thing at a time. It's the opposite of multitasking. It is really also, I think, quite challenging, especially in the days that we live in where people are very busy, people are very distracted. We're always, not always, but often half present because we're checking our phones all the time. And when we're mindful, we're slowing down and we're just focusing on one thing at a time. And I believe research has showed that people are actually more time efficient when we do that, even though there's an urge to just jump around and try to do many things at the same time. And effectively is keeping our focus on what our goal is. When people are in emotion mind, for sure, but in general, like a lot of times emotions will drive people's behavior, and we might wind up behaving or doing things that we regret later that actually take us away from our goals. So when we keep effectiveness in mind, we are thinking about what our goal is and trying to act in accordance with our goal and not let emotions run the show. So this distinction, open mind and focused mind, is actually not in the original DBT manual. This was in the adolescent version. but I like it. I think it adds something additional to our understanding of mindfulness. A lot of times, I think people think about mindfulness as being more focused mind or attentional control, where we're choosing to focus our attention on one thing. But it could also be more of an open mind type of an experience where we're just present in the moment, taking in whatever is going on around us. So I think about this a lot, like in the context of maybe being out in nature and just being open to the whole sensory experience, right? That we're going to see things and we're going to smell things and we're going to hear things, and just sort of taking it all in. And not like choosing to focus necessarily on one thing. So there's many different ways one can be mindful. I would say there's endless ways one could be mindful. These are just some examples of mindfulness practices. Observing one's breath can be really grounding. I imagine it's something many of you use in your clinical practice with clients. I always give the example of watching a sunset because I think sunsets they're very beautiful, and they usually catch our attention to some degree. But it's a different experience when we actually stop and focus and pay attention to the sunset. We might just sort of notice in passing and be like, oh, that's pretty. When we sit with it, it could be really impactful, and like we're going to appreciate it much more. Listening to the noises around you is another example. Eating a piece of chocolate or drinking anything for that matter. Noticing an urge to do something, noticing body sensations, observing your thoughts coming in and out of your mind. And a lot of times we use imagery when we do that, right? So we'll imagine putting our thoughts on a cloud that's floating by or on a lily pad that's floating down the ocean. Observing your body sitting in a chair, lying down or walking, wrapping yourself in a cozy blanket, noticing the sensations, or smelling freshly brewed coffee. Okay, so DBT stands for dialectical behavior therapy. Dialectics is obviously a very important concept in DBT. That's why it's part of the name of it. And the therapy is really focused on teaching clients how to find a balance in their lives. Dialectics also, I think Moshel included it in the treatment because people who struggle with intense emotionality tend to be very black and white thinkers. And so this is trying to shift people away from black and white thinking to seeing other people's perspectives, being able to hold two truths at the same time, where we say, recognizing the kernel of truth in in the other person's perspective. So within the 4 modules of DBT, whoever heard Chevy and John's lecture, they went over this a little bit already. There's mindfulness, which we've been talking about. There's distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. Each of those modules is either officially a change module or an acceptance module. Oh, sorry, I didn't say. One of the main dialectics of DBT is that of acceptance and change, right? So we're constantly trying to sort of find this balance with clients of trying to help them change, right? Change how they emotionally react to things or change the way they think about things, but also balance that with acceptance, right? That being able to sit with their experience, be able to accept whatever's coming up for them and make space for it. And so the modules are split between being more change-focused and more acceptance-focused. John and Chevy started talking about this. They a little bit stole my material, but just kidding. I think that we read an article years ago. The team read an article years ago by Janice Dunkley that really cautions against overusing distress tolerance skills. I think a lot of times distress tolerance skills are used as change skills as opposed to as acceptance skills. They're meant to be used in crisis situations to just survive the moment. One of the skills is distraction. So just taking a break from the situation so that we don't maybe make things worse, and then be able to go back to the situation, go back to the emotion. And I think oftentimes that second step doesn't happen, which is very important. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but just continuing to review the other 2 modules. There's emotion regulation skills, which are skills to learn there's 3 parts to the module. The first part is really psychoeducation, and I think this is really important, helping clients identify what they're feeling, discussing the purpose of emotions. A lot of times we'll have a conversation in group about whether people would like to, if they could get rid of their emotions or not, because emotions can be messy and emotions can be painful. But really talking about what emotions do give us and what we do benefit, how we do benefit from having emotions. So that's the first part of emotion regulation. And then there's a group of skills that helps with regulating our emotions or decreasing the intensity of our emotions. And then there's another section on decreasing emotional vulnerability. And then interpersonal effectiveness skills are skills that help us have more healthy relationships, learn how to set boundaries, maybe be more gentle in relationships if that's something that we struggle with, how to maintain our own self-respect and make sure we're respecting the other person. So just elaborating a little bit more. Okay, so firstly, this next section is about mindfulness and emotion regulation. As I said before, mindfulness is the key skill in DBT. They call it the core skill in DBT. And other skills are not going to be so effectively implemented without mindfulness. And that's why also each group we start off with a mindfulness exercise like we started off this morning. Because mindfulness, I think for two reasons. I think of mindfulness as a muscle. For some people, it's easier to be present. For other people, it's really, really hard. But regardless of your starting point, it can be improved. Your ability to be present can grow and can get stronger, like strengthening a muscle. And so I think that we start off groups doing a mindfulness exercise, both for practice to be able to improve our ability to be present, and also because it helps get people sort of in a more grounded place, and hopefully they'll be able to get more out of group, starting off that way. So going back to this article by Dunkley that we read, focusing too much on distress tolerance skills can actually take people away from being with themselves. I remember when we first opened up Machon Dvir over 9 years ago. I think in the change acceptance dialectic, I was much more change-oriented, and clients would call me for skills coaching, and I'd be frantically looking through the binder, trying to come up with a skill that would help them feel better, or prevent them from self-harming, and again, it was mostly distress tolerance skills. And as my experience has grown, I would say I'm more oriented now on the acceptance side, where I'm really spending more time trying to help clients identify what they're feeling and be with the emotion and understand it, and not rush to just get rid of it. There's different distress tolerance skills, but one of them is distraction. And again, it's meant to be used very sparingly and in a short-term way. But if people are using it all the time, then that just turns into avoidance, right? You're never actually dealing with anything. You're not learning how to regulate your emotions. You're not going to make any changes in your life because you're constantly just running away from what you're feeling. So Dunkley says that relying too much on distress tolerance skills prevents clients from learning how to sit with discomfort and regulate themselves using emotion regulation skills. We're not looking to get rid of emotions, right? Human beings are emotional beings. Emotions are not a bad thing. And we can't get rid of emotions, even if we wanted to, right? So we're not looking to get rid of emotions. We're looking to learn how to tolerate our emotions so that they fit the situation and can be tolerated. And as I said before, distress tolerance skills can be overused and lead to avoidance. Chevy said this before, but I'll just repeat it again because not everybody was in that lecture, that over-reliance on distress tolerance skills can lead to clients reporting that skills are not working, there not being any changes in their life circumstances or movement towards a life worth living because they're not problem solving, right? They just keep running away from what they're feeling. It can cause them to complain about levels of distress increasing, and it might also cause clients to seek more solutions to numb the body or to avoid, for example, increasing prescription drugs, substances, excessive sleep, food restriction. Okay, so there's many skills in DBT that address emotion. DBT as a whole addresses emotion regulation. There's many skills that I would say are specifically like in the mindfulness category. The first one is wise mind, which we talked about, right? So that's that sort of integrated state of being able to be connected to our reason and our logic. Actually, I didn't say this at the beginning. Benji kind of touched upon this at the beginning when he did mindfulness, but wise mind is also our inner wisdom. And I think that helping clients recognize they have an inner wisdom and helping them cultivate their inner wisdom can be really powerful. There's grounding techniques that we use and self-soothing. We work on labeling emotions, noticing body sensations. We say, I'm sure you might have heard that, if you can name it, you can tame it, right? A lot of times clients, they know that they're feeling bad, right? So something doesn't feel good, something's bothering them, they don't know what they're feeling, they might not know why they're feeling it. There's not really much to do with that, right? If you don't know what's going on inside of you, how could you work through it? How could you deal with it? So there's a lot of emphasis placed on naming emotions, and a lot of times even just recognizing what we're feeling can bring down the intensity of the emotion. Because what happens is we go from emotion mind, where we're just feeling and we're flooded with emotion, to starting to bring in our reason and our logic and our prefrontal cortex that got hijacked, and we start thinking, okay, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Sometimes clients don't know, and then they might become more dysregulated because they get anxious, they can't figure it out. But the more we practice, the easier it becomes, and that's a really important part of learning how to emotionally regulate. There's a skill called the stop skill, which is kind of like a pre-skill. John also mentioned this, but it's pausing, like when we're about to react in a situation. Of course, it's an acronym because DBT loves acronyms. So the S stands for stopping. It could be physically stopping, okay? The T stands for taking a step back. It could be physically taking a step back or in our minds taking a step back. The O stands for observing what's going on inside of us and around us. And then P is proceeding mindfully. There's a skill called radical acceptance, which is a really hard skill, and it's not something you can just learn and put into practice. It's a process, and it involves accepting things in our lives that we wish were not the way they are. And the reason they call it radical is because a lot of times people will intellectually accept things in their lives, right? They're like, yeah, I accept it, but like deep down, they haven't accepted it. And so in what we try to work with clients on is a full acceptance, right? So mind, body, and spirit. And as I said, it's a process. And this could be things that happened to us in the past. This could be things going on in our lives now. This could be, certain people we have in our lives. Again, we constantly are trying to balance this acceptance and change dialectic. So I think even before we try to change things, there needs to be acceptance, because otherwise we might be in denial and then we're never going to get to the change place. But sometimes we can't change things, and we just simply have to accept them. And we talk, in group about how when we don't accept painful things in our lives, we suffer, right? Everybody experiences pain in their lives, but fighting reality leads to suffering. And so we don't want to suffer, right? There are two skills, mindfulness of current thoughts and mindfulness of current emotions. And these skills teach us how to create some space between ourselves and our thoughts, our emotions. Again, we're not trying to get rid of our thoughts, get rid of our emotions. That is impossible. More to be able to observe them, and there's different techniques that we teach to create, other ways to create space. And there's chain analysis, which John talked about, which is, I think it's more like meant to aid in behavioral change, but it requires a lot of mindfulness, because you're identifying the behavior that you didn't want to engage in, and then you have to think about what the prompting event was, and then you're step by step going through thoughts, behaviors, physiological sensations, urges, action, whatever, and it's like, and you're required to be present with yourself in order to do that, and to learn more about what's going on inside of you, leading to the behavior that you engaged in. I didn't write this down, but also diary cards are part of DBT treatment. And ideally, if clients are doing them, they're everyday tracking emotions they're feeling, that any type of target behaviors they might have engaged in. And that, again, is requiring clients to pause and to check in with themselves. which is mindfulness. Okay, so how does mindfulness help with emotion regulation, and I would say just in general? So it allows people to have more control over their behavior by being able to slow down and notice emotions, thoughts, and urges, and thereby decreases impulsivity. I really like the second one. I think that mindfulness increases pleasure in life. Moshel talks about living life with your eyes wide open. I've come across clients on several occasions that have this profound sense of boredom in life and feel life is just monotonous. And it could be that way because we do generally do the same things every day. But when we're present and when our eyes are open, the little things can become meaningful or can become enjoyable. Actually, somebody this week in group, we were talking about increasing pleasant activities on a day-to-day basis. And she said that she used to really enjoy, like, when her child was younger, holding his hand and just noticing, like, his little hand and her big hand. Now, that's such a, arguably nothing experience, right? People who have kids hold their kids' hands all the time. But if we stop and we can, sort of enjoy, like, the specialness of the moment, like, it could be meaningful. And I think the reason that mindfulness is so and it's been already like decades, but is so popular is because we do live in such a distracted time, especially with technology. I mean, it kills me to see, I'm lucky because I didn't get my smartphone until my last child was born and I wasn't addicted to it then. But like I see parents all the time with kids and they're just on their phones and they're missing their kids grow up. I mean, maybe that's extreme, right? I'm sure they do have moments that they are present and engaged with their children. But life passes us by if we're not present. I mean, it passes by either way, but we'll get to experience life fully if we're present. So I think that that's really an important benefit of mindfulness. Mindfulness helps us make better decisions, right? Because as we discussed, when we're in a mindful state, we're both able to be connected with our logic and our reason and with our emotions. And we're able to access our inner wisdom and everything when we're in wise mind. Mindfulness can help us increase our ability to focus because we're essentially training our minds when we practice mindfulness. We're choosing to focus our attention on certain things. And again, this might be really challenging at the beginning, but the more we do it, the easier it becomes. And this could also be helpful for people with executive functioning issues or ADHD to, again, sort of increase their ability to choose what they focus on. And lastly, it can help increase compassion for oneself and for others. I think increasing self-compassion can be really challenging. I'm not saying it's not possible. I think it is, and it's a really important thing to work on. Increasing compassion for others, I think, is going to naturally happen if we're more mindful because we're going to be really with the other person, present with them, sort of able to more able to feel what they're feeling and be with them, and naturally we're going to feel more compassionate when we're in that state. Okay, so now I wanted to talk about a couple of different clinical issues that I see a lot in my work. I'm sure you all do also, where mindfulness can be helpful. One of them is avoidance, and the other one is cognitive fusion, which is not a DBT term. I stole it from ACT. I think DBT would call it just being in emotion mind, right? Where we're just fused with our thoughts. Like we can't really, we can't like take a step back and recognize whether our thoughts are true or if they make sense. So starting with avoidance, there's many types of avoidance that people engage in. These are some examples. The first one's emotional avoidance, right? So just being disconnected from ourselves, feeling numb, dissociated. I think, there's a spectrum of how disconnected from ourselves that we might be. So again, numbness would be on one end and dissociation would be on the other end. Over-control or perfectionism, keeping very busy. Tsachi is going to be talking about this later today, over-control. But you'll often see clients that they don't stop. They're always busy doing something, very perfectionistic, Sometimes it'll show up with like just a lot of talking, like just filling up the session with words, and there's no space for them, for what they're feeling, for what's going on in the room. What was I going to say about that? I don't know. Okay, I'll go back to it. There's behavioral avoidance, right? So avoiding situations that might cause anxiety or some aversive emotion, like I was avoiding preparing for this. Cognitive avoidance is avoiding thinking about things that are distressing. Interpersonal, maybe avoiding intimacy, avoiding conflict. Somatic, avoiding anything that might evoke a bodily sensation that maybe is connected to a trauma or anxiety. Then there's safety behaviors, ritualistic and compulsive behaviors. They all could fall under the category of OCD. OCD is, it's all about trying to escape from anxiety, right, by engaging in certain behaviors. Oh, I was going to say before about the over-control and perfectionism. Maybe you could apply this to all the types of avoidance. I'm sure a lot of times you'll see clients can't fall asleep at night because after a full day of avoiding everything, they have to stop and they have to turn off devices at a certain point to go to sleep, and then everything comes flooding them, all their thoughts and all their worries, and it's a big problem. I see people all the time nowadays, besides being on our phones, with earbuds in all day long, listening to music, listening to podcasts. There's just this, and it's really easy to do it nowadays, right? But there's this fear or this just running away, constantly just being with ourselves. And so mindfulness is really trying to counteract that, right? And just say, turn it off and just be. And don't wait till you're about to go to sleep, because then you're not going to be able to fall asleep. Okay, and then the last one is addictive behavior, such as substance use and technology. Okay, so how does mindfulness help with avoidance? I often refer to clients as being emotion phobic. I don't know if that's a real term or not, but a lot of times people, especially people who I think are more emotionally sensitive, they experience emotions very strongly, and it's very overwhelming. And then they get into this cycle where they're avoiding their emotions and avoiding until they bubble up, bubble over, and then they come crashing down on them, and they're drowning, and they're suffering, and it's so painful. And then that just reinforces emotions are dangerous, emotions are overwhelming, and I'm going to keep avoiding them until the same thing happens again. So I talk about a soda bottle analogy, that if you shake a soda bottle and you open up the top, what happens? It's going to explode, right? If you shake a soda bottle and you open up the cap a little bit and you let some fizz out, and then you close it, and then you open up a little bit and you close it, right? When you finally take the cap off, there's no explosion, right? Because you made space for you let the fizz out. And likewise, with emotions, if we don't make space for our emotions, if we don't allow ourselves to feel our emotions, hopefully as they come, but it doesn't, whatever, at some point, in the day, then there is going to be this build-up effect. So mindfulness helps combat that. As we mentioned already, mindfulness creates space between the person and their emotion and thoughts by teaching how to observe what's going on inside of us. I read an article years ago. It was comparing mindfulness and dissociation, and it was saying when a person is dissociated, they're disconnected from themselves, but they're observing themselves kind of from the outside. And when we're mindful, there is a disconnect. There is some space between us and our thoughts and our feelings, but we're observing ourselves from the inside. And I thought that was a really nice way to describe it. Mindfulness helps us come back to the present moment. I just wrote Linehan, that was just a note to myself. But I years ago saw a short video of Moshel Linehan. She was talking about how if we think about everything that happened to us in the past and all of our worries about the future, it's really overwhelming. But if we take life moment by moment, usually we can handle each moment, right? So if we just think about, you just have to get through this moment, and you have to get through the next moment, life becomes easier, and mindfulness teaches us how to do that. Mindfulness increases tolerance for uncomfortable emotions. it's basically exposure. The more we allow ourselves to feel our emotions, the more we realize that we can tolerate them. We talk about in DBT how emotions, not only can we not get rid of them, but we want to have emotions. Emotions give us information. Emotions make life colorful. I was thinking driving here and then also hearing Benji's mindfulness, what I was talking about, like connecting with our wise heart. I never heard that term before, but I was feeling like my heart was very full because people knew I was anxious about this, and people were like supportive and wishing me luck, and like it's those relationships and connections that make, I don't know, I think make life worth living. And so as much as relationships can be messy, as much as emotions can be messy and emotions can be painful, emotions also make life rich and colorful, and teach us information. So they teach us what we value, what we like and dislike, what our hopes are, what our disappointments are. For example, I mean, many emotions are not so pleasant, but the emotion of jealousy or whatever, right? It's like a gross emotion. It doesn't feel good to feel jealous or envious. They distinguish between the two in DBT, but it gives us information. If we're feeling envious of somebody else, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. It means that there's something we want different in our lives. It doesn't mean we want to take what the other person has, but it tells us like maybe there's something that you want to prioritize in your life because you wish you had this. Your emotions telling you wish you had this, and that's really important information to have. Or if we're angry about something, maybe we need to change something in our lives because it's not fair to us or it's not working for us, and so we don't want to be running away from our emotions. We want to be listening to them. And then lastly, mindfulness teaches us how to slow down, to check in with ourselves. In session, I often will stop, we'll check in with clients and ask them what's going on for you right now, especially if I notice some change in them. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? And we want them to be able to do that for themselves also. I just saw this quote. Someone posted it on their WhatsApp status. It didn't say, there was no name with the quote, but I liked it and I thought it was relevant for what I'm speaking about. So it says, your triggers are your assignments. What makes you irrationally angry, what hurts unexpectedly, what scares you illogically, that's not random. That's your work. Most people avoid triggers, but they're showing you where healing needs to happen. Stop running from them, study them. So this is kind of the same idea about trying to listen to our emotions, but also listen, the triggers, what happens when we get triggered? We have an emotional reaction, right? Pay attention to it. That's where the growth happens. That's where the progress is going to happen in therapy also. Okay, so that was avoidance. And then the second clinical issue I wanted to discuss is cognitive fusion. It happens all the time that clients we're all influenced by our thoughts. Our thoughts have a very big impact on us. And thoughts can make us feel all different kinds of ways. And we can't stop thoughts from coming into our minds, but we can figure out what to do with them, how to change our relationship with them. So it's different types of cognitive fusion might be, like if you're dealing with a specific situation, not just sticking with that situation, but bringing in all of the other times that you felt this way in your life, which obviously is going to make it much bigger and more overwhelming. Judgments about oneself and others. This is a really big one. Some other modalities call it the inner critic, like IFS and schema therapy, but being able to not just believe that inner critic, that judgmental voice about ourselves, and be able to challenge it, to distance ourselves from it. Catastrophizing, assuming a threat, are things that we often do that cause us distress. Reacting to current situations based on past experiences, and ruminating and obsessive thinking. So how does mindfulness help with these different sort of thinking traps or cognitive fusion? So it doesn't get rid of our thoughts, but it changes our relationship to them. In fact, if we try and stop our thoughts, like you might have heard this example before, but if someone says to you, don't think about a purple elephant, you're going to think about a purple elephant, right? The more we tell ourselves don't think about something, the more often we're going to think about it. So we don't want to fight. We don't want to get into fights with our thoughts. We want to change our relationship with them. Mindfulness helps us create distance from our thoughts by observing them without judgment. It helps anchor us in the present rather than getting stuck thinking about the past or worrying about the future. There's all different techniques we teach in DBT to help us change our relationship with our thoughts. One of them is not just thinking the thought, but saying, I'm having a thought that. So again, there's me, and then there's a thought that I'm having. We're not fused together. Other examples of things that we teach in the skill mindfulness of current thoughts is there's kind of like funny ideas like having clients sing their thought, like especially like a thought that they can't get out of their head, or really distressing thought, or say it in a funny voice or in a different accent, just to recognize that it's just a thought and it can be there. And mindfulness helps us also loosen up our thinking. A lot of times we especially people with who are black and white thinkers who struggle with emotional dysregulation, have very rigid thinking, right? This is right and this is wrong. And dialectics, as I mentioned before, helps us loosen that up, right? Think about like, well, what's the kernel of truth on the other side? There could be multiple rights, right? There could be multiple things that are true. There's another skill in the emotion regulation module called checking the facts, which is similar, right? We're checking like, am I making assumptions? Are there other interpretations that I could have for the situation? Am I assuming a threat? Am I catastrophizing? Like really taking a step back and checking in with the way we're understanding things. Okay, I want to end off talking about potential pitfalls of mindfulness. I guess I'll just say overall, while I have seen many of these challenges of, when you use mindfulness in treatment, I think the benefits outweigh the pitfalls or challenges, but it's worth going through these anyway. When we first opened up Machon Dvir, I don't know, it hasn't really happened so much since then, but we had a lot of clients that were like, had a strong aversion to mindfulness. Like, I couldn't even say the word around them. And I think that people sometimes hate mindfulness, or they don't want to get anywhere near mindfulness because of over-control, perfectionism, this feeling of I have to do it right. If I'm focusing on something and I can't keep my focus, I start to panic. You can't really get mindfulness wrong. We always say at the beginning of mindfulness exercises that, after we introduce it, that if you notice your thoughts wandering to something else, just gently try to bring them back to what you're focusing on. And even if you can't, even if you start having associations or you notice your thoughts go somewhere else, mindfulness is about being present in the moment with yourself. If you're not able to focus on the thing you're trying to focus on, that's also fine. The second thing here, radical acceptance, I often find myself like a little bit stuck with or like confused about, because sometimes people have like really done this whole process of radically accepting something, and then something happens and it doesn't affect them so much because they've accepted it. And I often question, like, have they really accepted it, or are they just disconnected from themselves? And I think that could be hard to thresh out because it could look very similar, right? There's not like such a strong response. For trauma survivors, sometimes asking them to notice internal states can be very overwhelming and triggering, so that's something to keep in mind. This next one I haven't personally seen. We did have one client at Machon Dvir who we felt mindfulness sort of triggered like psychosis for them. But people who already have psychotic disorders, mindfulness could potentially increase detachment or unusual perceptual experiences. So it's something to keep in mind. People who have acute anxiety or panic, if they're turning inward and noticing heart rate or noticing breath, that could trigger catastrophic thinking, such as my heart is racing, I'm about to die, or cause intense overwhelm. And lastly, like passivity or fatalism, that people are in this acceptance, mindful, mindset. They could just be like, okay, whatever happens, it's fine, I accept it. And that's not really ideal because, again, then you're not going to change anything in your life. And we always want to try to find this balance of acceptance and change. So some solutions for mindfulness potential pitfalls. Firstly is being deliberate about what practice you use with clients. So for example, with trauma survivors, it might be easier for them to focus on orienting to things around them as opposed to focusing inside of themselves. Also short, titrated doses. So for some people, they might not be able to be mindful for more than 20 seconds to start off with, and that's fine, right? We're not asking clients to sit for 10 minutes or a half hour, right? Maybe over time you could work up to that, but we're not starting there. And also to be sure to pair mindfulness with grounding. Okay, and just, I guess, to wrap it up with dialectics, because this is dialectical behavior therapy. So awareness without grounding can lead to destabilization. Acceptance without action could lead to resignation. And observation without compassion could lead to detachment. So just want to keep those things in mind.
Go back.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thanks. Anybody have any questions? I was just so clear. Yeah.
Can you just when you think about the application of mindfulness, do any particular cases come to mind?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. Okay. Any particular cases that come to mind to create mindfulness? Again, mindfulness is being constantly used with all my clients. I have a really complicated client who I'm working with now, who has a very severe abuse history, and she was nodding. I think you know what I'm talking about. And she fits into that over-controlled, perfectionistic type, and that's kind of been her way of coping with all the abuse. She's super successful. She's really quite intelligent and capable, and she pushes herself really hard, and she runs away from her internal experience all the time. I get stuck with her a lot because whenever I'm trying to introduce a new idea to her, she tries to run with it, and she expects herself to be able to incorporate it immediately into her life and to perfect it. And I keep telling her that's not the way change happens. It's not the way therapy works. Change happens slowly. And I see with her, the more she avoids, the more unstable she becomes. And it's hard because she's in a lot of pain. She's been through a lot of trauma. And I just keep pushing her to make space for it and let yourself feel it. And I just want to say one other thing, that we want to find a balance when it comes to especially when we're working with trauma. We don't want to we don't have clients just sitting with their pain all day long. We don't want them to be sitting with, and having flashbacks or going back to memories. We don't want that. We want to make space for it, but when we choose to make space for it, not when it's, coming in, intruding in our lives. So we might use, what's it called? Imagery, right? To if something comes up for you, to put it in a container, to close it up, to put chains around, or to put it in a box, put it on the shelf. We're going to go back to it, right? We can't run away from these things forever, but we also don't want to be, in an emotional state all the time. So, yeah, sorry, what do you want to ask?
It's another thing, but my experience, ADHD people hate any kind of mindfulness or staying present. What's your experience with this?
I think maybe they hate it because it's particularly challenging for them, and maybe they feel like they're failing, when they try to do it. And again, that's why I would start off with in a very titrated way, very short, 10 seconds. Can you focus on something for 10 seconds? I know with ADHD, it goes back and forth from lack of focus to hyper focus, and we want to try to find some in-between place. But I would start off in very small doses.
What about clients who the second or therapist up there, and they start off by saying, and I hate mindfulness, so don't use mindfulness. Same question.
Right, so that's what I was saying, more when we first opened up, we had clients like that, I guess I would want to explore with them why do you hate mindfulness? What comes up for you when you try to be mindful? And sometimes I think then especially I just wouldn't use the word. I would just say like, let's just be present, because maybe there's just negative associations with the word itself. But there's reasons why they have such an aversion to it, and I'd want to understand that more.
You can be mindful without being mindful.
What do you mean?
If you don't use the word.
Right.
I mean, it's, you don't, the word is a trigger for them, and if you just if you walk around the word doesn't trigger. So
Right.
You can still be,
See the features of it, right?
Exactly.
You don't learn
You
mindfulness.
describe it non-judgmentally.
Exactly. Right.
stay around, walk around, don't see.
Just be careful, because sometimes clients have said like, I'm mindful, I'm like zoned out. Like that is not mindful, right? Mindfulness is tuning in, zoning in, whatever. So that's not the right experience. Yeah.
Can you talk for a moment about radical acceptance? I find with some clients, they respond to it right away, and for some people, no. How can I radically accept that?
I think radical acceptance, there's many parts that are hard about it, but I think one thing that makes it particularly challenging, I would just stop 5 minutes, okay, is that people think that if I'm accepting something, I'm agreeing with it, I'm forgiving the person who hurt me. And so we make it very clear, accepting, first of all, it's not about the other person. It doesn't mean that you forgive them or you agree with things that happened. It means it's for your own benefit. Like I said, when we don't accept, we suffer. So maybe just trying to like frame it that way could help.
For patients who are like very deeply feeling, and do tend to avoid emotions, how do you balance that practicing mindfulness and emotion while also figuring out when to move on from those emotions? So I'm thinking about a particular patient who like feels sadness really deeply, and I'll say to her that they want you to feel the sadness,
Right.
Like allow yourself to experience it, and it's hard for her to find like that moment here. It's like, okay, now it's actually time to push yourself to move on.
Right.
Instead of saying, like, it's okay to cry, and at some point, like, it's time to move on.
In this article, this Dunkley article that I referred to, she has a section on sadness, and she talks about if the sadness fits the facts. I don't know where she gets this number from, but she tells the clients, like, try to let yourself sit with it and cry for 7 minutes. Tears, just like really fully feel the sadness for 7 minutes, and then close it up. Or using imagery, like I said, imagine putting it in a box, or just shift your attention to something else. Get on with your life. Do something active. Do something productive. Right? It's not going to be effective for clients to sit with their emotions all day long, and that's that sort of delicate balance that we're trying to find with them, helping them make space for their emotions without their emotions just pouring out all day long and them not being able to function. Sure. Okay. Yeah.
How do you present mindfulness for teenagers, and how do you proceed with it? Like, do you give them a lot of variability with practices, or do you create a ritual?
What's that saying? Do I create what?
What ritual? What
ritual.
helps
Teenagers?
to be consistent?
I mean, I think with even the same as with adults, openness to it and motivation to use it is important. I don't generally have rituals per se. I mean, if people are filling out diary cards, then the act of doing that requires some like self-check-in every day. But also just in session, right? Checking in with the clients a lot, and then that sort of hopefully teaches them to be able to check in with themselves. So I don't necessarily work differently with adolescents than with adults when it comes to mindfulness.
Just based on, I'm not sure what the name is, she said a question about if a client says, I hate mindfulness, modeling mindfulness in that moment and saying, walk me through the hate. Like, you really hate something? Okay, walk me through the hate. I'm ready, let's tackle this head on. That in itself is automatically your model of what mindfulness is. But let's just stay with the hate. Okay, so drop mindfulness, walk me through the hate. Why do you feel that?
Right. And would you then say that was mindful what we just did? Would you be explicit? Yeah.
Right, they hate your name. If you say, oh,
Thanks. Okay, thank you.